Ciao a tutte e a tutti, bentornati. And also, hi Emily, welcome on stage. Ciao, ciao, nice to meet you. I will give a small introduction in Italian and in English, both languages, and then we can start. So, abbiamo già sul palco Emily Weber, Agile Lean Coach in Tacit London, anche autrice di un libro che si chiama Building Successful Communities of Practice, che è praticamente il tema di questo Bitcamp, quindi credo che abbia molto da condividere sull'argomento. Ha anche un blog, emilyweber.co.uk, che veramente vi invito a seguire perché condivide tantissime idee su framework, tool, in un modo molto sintetico e actionable, con schemi, diagrammi, meme divertentissimi, quindi vi invito a seguirla. Ci presenterà appunto un suo speech, Building Successful Communities of Practice. Per rivolgere le domande, come sempre vi invito ad usare il nostro strumento di Q&A che è Mentimeter, di cui Antonello adesso vi girerà il codice in chat, e alla fine del suo intervento insomma sceglieremo alcune domande oppure le più votate e le porremo ad Emily. So let's welcome Emily Weber, Agile Lean Coach in Tacit London and also author of the book Building Successful Communities of Practice, which is basically the topic of our Bitcamp today. So I believe we will have a lot to share on this topic. And she also has a blog, emilyweber.co.uk, which I really invite to follow because she shares a lot of ideas on framework tools in a synthetic yet actionable way with schemes, diagrams, and funny memes. So really, I invite you to follow her also on her blog. And we will have, of course, a Q&A session, and it will work like that. So we have a Mentimeter link with a code that Antonello just shared on the chat, and people can start from the audience writing questions and also voting the others. And I will pick the most voted ones or the most interesting at the end of the speech, so we can chat a bit after the initial sharing. So without further saying, hi Emily, and the word to you.
Thank you. I will just make sure I share my slides. So you should be able to see those. Yes. Great. Okay. Oh, it's good to be here. Although it feels like a very long year this year. So we're right at the end of a very long year. So today I'm going to talk to you about probably my favorite topic, which is building successful communities of practice. So my name is Emily. Hello. Chiara mentioned my blog, which is at emilyweber.co.uk, and I'm on Twitter at eWeber. But before I start, I just want to tell you a little bit about my journey with communities of practice. So now I'm an agile delivery organizational consultant with a real focus on creating organizations that help people thrive, which helps organizations thrive. So a few years back, I joined an organization. The organization I had just left was an agency. It was very social. It had around 50 people in it, which is a very significant number for organizations, because when you have around 50 people, it's the right amount of people for everyone to know each other, and it can feel like a very nice, social, supportive organization. And in that organization, I was an agile delivery manager, and I sat on a table with other agile delivery managers, and we were quite close to each other. We had a small support group. We got to share and learn with each other daily. We helped each other through tricky situations. We celebrated success. And it was great. And the organization I left there to join another organization, and that had 300 people in it. So it was quite different. When I joined, I found it really hard to navigate. There were people with the same role as me, delivery managers, but they sat with their teams, and I didn't have a team to begin with, and I didn't really have any way to connect with the other people that had the same role as me. And even if I did, they were busy with their teams, and I didn't want to feel like I was intruding on their time. And this made it really difficult for me to understand the practices of the organization and the culture. And I just lost my support networks, and they were the people that really helped me kind of help build my confidence and keep me motivated in my role. When in my new organization, I finally joined a team, I was the only delivery manager on it. So I didn't have anyone else in my team that had the same role as me. And it was a friendly organization. I did get to meet other people, but it took a while. And sometimes I had to search them out to find that support network of people that did the same thing as me. So later on, we had a bit of a restructure, and I ended up taking on the role of head of agile delivery, which meant that I was responsible for the other people doing the role of delivery management. And my number one priority then was to make sure that everyone was connected to each other, so that we could, so everyone had a support network, so that people could learn from each other, and really importantly, people could speak with a unified voice. I already had some experience with building communities outside of the work context, and this was my chance to apply that within work. So this really started my journey with communities of practice within an organizational context. And I believe they are fundamentally important for any organization. This is the topic of the day today, and the learnings that I have from building communities of practice I'll be sharing with you today. It's quite a few, it's a lot of slides, there's a lot of images. I will make my slides available afterwards as well, so you can look over them if there's anything that you missed that you want to go back to. So since then, since my starting out with communities of practice, I've gone on to work with organizations around the world, helping them embed communities of practice and join people up. So those are all the logos there on the left-hand side, so different types of organizations. And I continue to build communities and connections outside of the work context as well. Some of that has informed this book, Building Successful Communities of Practice, which I wrote a few years ago, and that lots of people refer to. So some of what's in there will be in the talk today. I've also learned extra things since I wrote that book, so it's some updated things. So together we can do amazing things. As humans, we thrive in social communities, and they form an integral part of our society and our sense of self. And we need other people to help us survive and to thrive. And this is as true in the workplace, where we spend most of our time. I have a question that I ask people when I go into organizations and I help communities build. I ask them this, I ask them, what value do you get from connecting with people who care about the same thing as you? And what I tend to find, and even there's probably a few things that are jumping to your mind now as you think about this question. But what I tend to find is that people inherently know that connecting with other people is good, because they tend to say the same things. And actually this slide, although you can't read all of it, and some of this is, there's some Spanish in here, there's some English in here. I ask this question of lots of people, and I've asked it of people in different organizations around the world, and we tend to get the same answers that come out of it. So people get ideas, they get inspired, they get feedback, confidence, therapy, I think is not on this slide, but I've heard people say that before. And the same topics come out every time. They come out, whether it's designers in Peru, it's developers in the UK, or product managers in India. The same thing comes out. So inherently we're social creatures, and this is the same wherever we are. This is Alex Pentland. And Alex Pentland is a social psychologist, what is it, MIT, and done a lot of studies into organizations and how people talk to each other, how people in organizations are connected to each other. He wrote a book called Social Physics, which is worth reading because it really talks about the organization as a social being. And he says that human communities can develop a sort of collective intelligence that is greater than the members' individual intelligence. And really, I think it's kind of the essence of communities, and it's the essence of collaboration, because when we join up with other people have different experiences to us. And when we join up lots of people with lots of different experiences, the collective intelligence that is greater, because we're able to build on top of each other's experiences, rather than just spending time by ourselves and only kind of knowing and learning what we've experienced ourselves. So this idea of we are, as a community, we are greater than the sum of our parts is really important. So I'm going to go through what is a community of practice, and I'll talk a bit about the benefits, and I'll talk about some tips at the end of this as well, and give you a chance to have time for some questions. So a community of practice, it's a term that's been around since the 1990s, and it was coined by Etienne Wenger. And he said it's groups of people who share concern or passion for something they do and learn how to do it better as they interact regularly. And there's a few kind of crucial points highlighted in this phrase. It's about sharing a concern or passion. So it's something that people are passionate about, and something that they practice. And they learn how to do it better through those interactions with each other and those regular interactions with each other. It can be kind of like a team in some ways, but it doesn't really have an end date. It's kind of it's ongoing. And what I found, this term has been around since the 1990s, but I found as our organizations as our structures flatten and as we kind of build multidisciplinary teams, it's become really relevant. And I'll kind of explain a little bit why in just a moment. So organizations are collections of people, and I do love talking about people. Sometimes we're organized into functions, and I've been places like this, like the company that I talked about at the beginning, that I left, that was 50 people. I sat on a table with people that did the same thing as me. And this is brilliant for sharing, for learning, for supporting each other. But it's not very good for working in a multidisciplinary way, which is how we tend to work in more modern organizations. So sometimes we are organized into multidisciplinary teams, and this is great because we're working day to day on product, on some kind of shared outcome. And then sometimes we put programs around those teams. What we start to do is move the people that do the same thing further and further away from each other. And this starts to create silos, and it removes us away from our support networks and from our ability to learn and share with each other. I was in an organization, or helping an organization a while back, and one of the things that I did there is I started to map out how knowledge spread around a bunch of people that did a really similar thing to each other. And it was really interesting to see the thicker orange lines here are who speaks to each other, who asks each other for help. So how does kind of help and knowledge spread around the organization? And where are there people that aren't kind of part of that? And these were people that did the same thing. The bigger circles are people that more people went to help to. And what this mapped out and what this showed is there were lots of silos here. There were lots of silos of information, of knowledge, of expertise, learning, support work, and decision making. And this isn't unusual for a lot of places. In another organization I was working with, I was talking to the iOS team. And they told me they spent 3 weeks trying to figure out a problem. It was a resizing problem, and they couldn't work out how to get it to work. And they spent a bunch of time trying to do that. And they found later on that there was another team in the same building that had solved that problem previously, but they had no way of connecting with each other. They didn't talk to each other. So they spent all this time rebuilding something that they didn't need to, because someone had already solved. If only they had been connected through a community of practice. So communities of practice, they cut across teams, they cut across programs, they join up people that do the same thing and care about the same thing. And this is particularly beneficial if you are the only person on your team that does a certain role. And I've definitely been in that situation where you're the one, you haven't got anyone else in the team that kind of has the same challenges you have in quite the same way. You haven't got somebody to bounce ideas off, to share good practice, to learn from each other. So bringing people back together through something like a community of practice really helps to support people and for them to be their best. There's a couple of lines on this slide as well. This line across the bottom, sorry, across the left-hand side going up is the what you do day to day, because when you're in a team, you're working on a common problem, some kind of common vision. Through the community is the how you do it. It's the people that care the most, the people that are kind of sharing expertise and always getting better at what they do, kind of keeping themselves honest and helping raise each other's capability. And I hear, these are some quotes from people in communities of practice. So people saying things like, we keep each other going, everyone is professional, insightful and emotionally supportive, or having people to bounce ideas off is relieving and rejuvenating, and they take their better selves to work after their sessions. And someone else saying they really feel like it's having a real impact on the confidence and capability. Sometimes I feel in organizations, people think the people stuff is kind of fluffy and not as impactful, but actually when you read the fact that it actually makes people better at their roles because they feel so supportive, it really does have a huge impact on how an organization works. So I'm going to talk to you about benefits of communities of practice and give you some examples along the way. So this might help you think about if you're thinking of starting a new community, or if you have one and you want to get some tips on tricks on how to make it better, or if you want to help explain the benefits of your communities, this should help. So I'll go through these very quickly, and then I'm going to go through them in a little bit more depth. And as I said, I'll share the slides so you've got these, you can refer back to them if you want to. So the 5 benefits of communities, and this comes from my research, it comes from my experience, that I always find it boils down to these 5 things. So the first thing is that communities really help support people, which increases confidence and motivation. The second is that it helps people learn and grow skills. It also helps people share knowledge and join up related work. It helps us to scale our approaches and share common practices across teams. And the 5th is that it helps us to collaborate and enables us to create better practices for everyone. And I'll go through some of those now with some examples. So the support network, I've talked about support a few times already in this talk, and it's fundamental. So having a supportive, trusting network, trusting relationships between members underpins the community. And without this, it's just a group of people. And it's true, you know, in your teams, you want to create a trusted, safe environment where people feel that they can talk about their concerns and they can share with each other openly. And this is true in a community. Once you have trust and you have a support network, there's so much else that comes from that. So really focusing on building the connections between people is really what creates the community. So I always put that first. I think it's fundamental, whether you're in a workplace or your community anywhere else. It's always nice to throw a few bits of research in here. There's a piece of research called No Employee an Island: Workplace Loneliness and Job Performance that was done in 2018. So this was pre-pandemic, before people were stuck at home communicating through their screens all the time. They did some research to understand about people's loneliness. So did people feel like they didn't have the connections they need in the workplace? And what they found is, I guess unsurprisingly, when you think about it, is that as you know, if people don't feel connected, they don't feel able to, you know, bring their ideas to contribute in the way that they might do if they felt like they were part of a safe network, their performance reduces as well. So if people don't feel supported, it really does affect how they feel in the workplace. And we've seen, and probably, you know, personally experienced, when you don't feel supported, somewhere, you end up leaving, which isn't great for anyone, really. So it is really fundamental. This quote here is one of my favorite quotes from somebody in a community that I was working with. So they said this, like, this was somebody that was kind of not feeling particularly great at work. We started a community of practice, and they really started to feel like they were part of a really great support network. And they said they all support each other, and any of us would do what we could to help another member of the community. They really felt like they had the security that if they were unable to do something, or if they needed help, they just had to ask, and loads of people would be there to help them, and they felt really safe to ask. So it stopped them feeling overwhelmed. Really great for just general motivation. Talked about communities of practice help us learn and grow our skills and get better at what we do together. This is kind of comes very, once you start joining up with people, this kind of comes quite quickly, that you start learning from each other. And there are lots of different ways that people learn. And a lot of the time, when we talk about learning in an organizational context, people kind of jump to formal training, and actually learning is much more broad than that. There's lots of different types, anywhere from kind of structured learning, things like formal training, through kind of unstructured learning, which is things like, conversations and help, just kind of sharing things with each other and learning kind of more informally. The communities of practice really help with that. But I also wanted to focus on deliberate practice, which I think is where, when you have a supportive group around you, is really valuable. So deliberate practice is where we might try out a new skill, try it to the point where we're comfortable doing it, but try it within a safe environment. So we're not doing it kind of in the live environment. So an example might be, there was a front end community that I was working with, and they used to get these kind of front end challenges. Like, one of them was creating moving animals with CSS, and they'd go off and they'd try those out, and then they'd bring them back and they'd talk about what they learned. So kind of building their skills in a really deliberate way, without thinking, oh, if I try this out in my actual product that I'm building, I might break it, or I'm really worried about doing this. So building skills in a really safe environment. Another community that I worked with that need to do a lot of facilitation, spent time trying out running workshops with each other. Or I've seen user researchers practicing interview techniques with each other. And because you have that community of people that understand your role as well, it's a safe environment to do that in, and it gives you a chance to get feedback, which is a really powerful way to learn. So there's lots of learning that you can do in a community. This quote here is from an engineering team that talked about, they would have learning sessions where they would try new tools and approaches without worrying that they were going to break the build, or they were going to break the product, and suddenly a whole bunch of users weren't going to be able to access it. So that, being able to do that in a supportive environment is really crucial. I like to think about it a little bit like this, that not every day should be match day. So a developer friend of mine said one day, he's like, oh, he said, you know what? He said, footballers, they get to spend so much time practicing. They get to practice techniques. They get to practice as a team. And not every single day is match day. And he says, as developers, it feels like every single day is match day. Every day we're out there, like, having to play the game, and we don't get any time to sit back and practice. So it's really important to find that time to kind of step back and find time to learn, which makes you better at your job. So we just think a bit more like footballers. Communities of practice help us share knowledge and join up related work. So I like to think about knowledge a bit like an iceberg. So at the top of the iceberg, we have explicit knowledge. So this is things that are easy to capture, to write down, and they don't change very often. So there might be things like policies, like holiday policies, or it might be legal things. But actually, under the water, there's this kind of ton of implicit or tacit knowledge that lives within the culture, it lives within the way people do things, which changes regularly, can't really easily be written down. What often happens in organizations is that people try and write all of that down, and you end up with the monster wiki that has all this information in that, as some people say, you know, the place that information goes to die. People write stuff in it thinking people are going to read it. Nobody ever reads it, or it's out of date, no one trusts it, and it just becomes this huge bunch of documents that no one ever reads. So implicit knowledge, tacit knowledge really lives in people. And if we find, you know, we need mechanisms to retain that knowledge, and we do that through social networks, and we do that through creating the opportunities for people to talk to each other and share with each other. So that's where communities come in. I was actually this quote and this picture come from two different product communities in two different countries. The community on the right here was a product management community where at the end of a session, I said, everybody go and shake the hands of somebody you haven't met before. And I was really surprised because they all worked in the same building, that everyone got up and they shook hands with each other. And product managers are often so busy working on their products that they don't spend time talking to each other. And the quote here is from a different product management community, where actually just bringing them together and giving them time to talk gave them the chance that they could join up. They found they had dependencies. I've actually been in another product manager community session where it turned out to 4 product managers, 3 of them were actually working on the same feature in different apps, but hadn't spoken to each other and didn't know that each other were building that same feature. And it was just immediately a chance to say, oh, this is a chance to learn from each other. So it's much easier to deal with those dependencies through conversation and negotiation. And it's much easier to have those conversations when you know each other, rather than having the conversation with somebody that you have never met before. And backing that up as well with things like real-time help and information is important. So this is actually a screenshot of a Slack channel. It's actually a community that I run, where somebody had a question and lots of people jumped in and answered it. So having communities that are supported by messaging platforms or forums is really important. But I would always say I've always seen them work best if people have actually had a chance to meet before, even if it's online. So finding that kind of face-to-face time is really important. The community here, which is a community that I run, which started as a meetup, it's called Agile in the Ether. It's been online, it's always been online for quite a few years now. And the Slack channel came out of that, but people had already met. So it's such a friendly environment because people have met before, at least met online, so when they talk to each other, they have an idea of who each other are. Communities practice help us scale our ways of working and share common approaches across teams. I have seen, and I'm sure many of you have experienced, organizations where there is a lot of duplicated work because people are not connected, or you'll see over here one team, they're building a design system and they're building a design system, and there's lots of things going on that could be happening together, but they're not happening together because people don't know what else is going on. Or there's lots of different ways of doing things, which makes people's experience in the organization really inconsistent. And that inconsistency can also show in the products you build. So if you're not talking to each other inside your organization, sometimes that's reflected in how people navigate around the products that you build. And sometimes, and I'm sure you've all experienced a product that feels like you're jumping from department to department because it feels kind of really stuck together. That often is because the organization behaves in that way. Sharing common approaches, people do things like design systems. I'm sure some of you have design systems. Some of those are public. The really key thing with these kind of things is if they're owned by communities and they're updated by the communities and they're owned by people who actually use them, it means that they're living and they're always useful, and they don't become that thing that was a document that someone wrote once upon a time and just no one ever looks at again because it's become outdated. But what's important here is it's kind of really about consistency, but not necessarily standardization. So helping people kind of having some common approaches to doing things. When communities own quality and standards, I always find it decentralizes assurance and creates consistent approaches. So instead of, I have seen organizations that have kind of a central assurance body, but actually if you've got people talking to each other, learning the best ways to do things, finding things out together and collaborating, then those practices will flow through those people and into those teams, and those consistent approaches will happen because that assurance is in everybody that's part of it. So the fifth benefit of communities of practice is they help us collaborate and create better practices for everyone. I always kind of shy away from using the term, or always prefer to use the term better practices than best practice. So for me, a best practice feels a bit like we've got the best practice now. We don't need to find any new practice. We're there, tick. Better practices for me really feels like we are always seeking new and better ways to do things, and we do that together. So that collaboration that communities have, and as people kind of find that they've got challenges and similar challenges, they do tend to work together and build on top of those and fix things. Because as well, communities are an amplifier and they help you make bigger changes than you can on your own. This actually is a photo of a developer community of practice that I work with, and it's one of my favorite photos because they just look so happy. They're so happy in their community. So, you know, we talked a bit earlier about collaboration and the fact that when you build on top of each other's experiences, that helps make us better, but it's also there is strength in numbers. It's very hard to make changes if you're an individual. It's much easier if you've got a bunch of people helping make those changes. So it really does amplify. And I've seen communities do things like create specialist training that they update and deliver. If you have internal training run by communities in your organizations, it makes it really relevant and really specific, especially as you onboard new people, like onboarding new people into communities to say, you know, if you're a new designer and you come and join the design community, we can tell you how we do things here, and we can help point you in the right direction and find the assets that you need. Actually, that's this organization here. Somebody told me that they joined as a designer and they couldn't get hold of the brand assets, like they couldn't get hold of the logo anywhere, and it was with somebody, they just weren't connected to them, and another team ended up redrawing it so that they could use it, which seems like extra waste of time that they didn't need to do. So other things like guidance, we mentioned design systems earlier, so guidance, living documents and reusable components. I've seen communities create those. On the left here, we've got Google's design system, which is public, which is owned and updated by the community at Google. On the right here is the UK government's service manual, and they have lots of different pages on there that help other parts of government and anyone that wants to look at it help create digital services, and the content on there is, as it says here, is updated by the communities. Actually, the page that I took here, which I took a screenshot of today, is actually about how to make services in an emergency. So something that is obviously very relevant and current for government organisations at the moment. And so they own and keep that updated. So it becomes really valuable collaboration. Communities I've also seen do things like peer-to-peer mentoring and specific support. So kind of creating mentoring programs within and across communities, so people that care about the same thing and people that do the same thing, supporting each other. As well as whole organizational transformation. So Barclays Bank in the UK credited a lot of their agile transformation down to the community itself creating that. So instead of having to go outside and hire external consultants, that's something that they did them from within, from themselves, from the community. So really valuable things that come out of collaboration. So those 5 benefits, as I mentioned, were support networks, learning and growing skills, sharing knowledge, joining up work, scaling approaches, and collaboration. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples and a couple of tips before we come to questions, just kind of why people have started communities in 3 examples here, and what it's benefited for them. This one here, this is the Centre for Digital Public Services in Wales. And so Wales is a small country in the UK, and they don't have huge amounts of people, but they have a number of public service organisations, and they really wanted to understand how they could enable digital transformation in Wales by joining up people from different organisations that do the same thing. So it wasn't just set in one organisation. We were able to go wider and find people from different organisations, but all within the public sector. And so we found a community that were already starting to form, because they were a really passionate bunch of people. And this was a bunch of people that really care about creating Welsh language services. So they were really kind of bilingual first, and they were called the Building Bilingual Services Community. And there's a tweet here on the left. One is the one at the top is in English. The one underneath is in Welsh, which is the same tweet. And we did a kickoff with them, got them together, got them around this community kickoff canvas, which there's a link to there, which will be in my slides, and got them to talk about what the purpose is of their community. And so they could describe it in a way that helped other people from across Wales join that community and understand what it was about. With Geo, which was a 10,000 person telecoms organization in India, our question really was, how can we align people, capability, and their apps and brand experience across a large distributed organization? And what happened with them is a very face-to-face culture, although quite siloed in some places. We started to bring people together. We wanted to create some consistency and some learning across the different teams. And then COVID hit, and from being a very face-to-face organization, suddenly they were all working from home in very different situations. So the community really helped keep people together, keep them. So there's on the left there is where another one of my favorite community photos is, where we got people together face to face, and on the right is where we kind of ended up that everything was being done over Teams and everyone was meeting in a distributed way. It really helped keep them together. And this example here was with the land registry. So it was really, with them, we really wanted to understand how can we accelerate capability and raise people's skills collectively through community activities. So this is actually the design community here. And collectively and together, we co-created a capability and training plan for them, which looked at how can they help grow each other's skills. So where can they share skills across the community? And if they needed to bring in external training, how could they do that together? So really kind of raising the capability of everyone together, rather than just like sending individuals on training courses, which is what I see in a lot of places. Just a couple of tips. I've talked to you about some benefits of the of communities. Just wanted to leave you with a few tips before we finish. The first thing is, communities is all about people, so always start with the people. We can get very ambitious about where these things can go, but actually it's about starting with people and finding people that are passionate, joining them up and letting them kind of run with that and see where that goes. If you make them too big too quickly, that can also kind of be their undoing, because if you and I've seen people organizations do this, say, you are all now in a community, and suddenly it's like being in a room of people you don't know and nobody wants to talk to each other. So starting small and slow and starting with people is important. Meet regularly, like meeting is really important, whether that's over video. It's also can happen over smaller groups, things like random coffee, where you join up people randomly. It's brilliant. One-to-ones, Slack conversations, you know, really building trust is important. When you do meet, start by sharing stories, share what you're doing, share what you're up to, and you'll create connections. People will say, you know, I'm working on something similar, I have the same challenge, and they'll want to talk about that. And from that, you'll start to identify other things you want to explore, or things you want to fix, or things you want to do, or things you want to learn. With any community, it's important to remember that it takes time to mature a community, and it goes through a number of phases. I have some tools on my website, again, another link here, which talks about maturity and how communities mature and what you might expect to see. But it does take time, and adding people in and changing people can change the dynamic of a community. Someone today in my meetup was asking a question about a community that used to be really vibrant and isn't anymore. And I talked about kind of the fact that when new people are added and people change, you might need to do a bit of a reset. So it's useful to think about that, like checking in. Are we still doing what we thought we were going to do? Is our purpose still the same? And, you know, create the conditions for success. You can start communities without any organizational support. You can get people together and you can talk about stuff. But there is also a time where you will need to get buy-in from organizations. So, you know, start with people, start with talking about why you exist, but you will need time. Time is always important, and encouragement and support. You do need, like, people do need to be recognized for their contributions. So if it's in your organization, you know, having a chance for people to be recognized and to be empowered to change things. So if you have things you want to change as a community, you want to have the opportunity to change those, and always evolve based on need. So always check in, see how the community is going, see if people are getting what they need from it, and then adapt it and change it from there. What works in one place might not be what works in another. I always like to end presentations on my favorite Venn diagram. So you can think about these two here as your silos, people that are not connected. And when you join them up, you get the magic in the middle. So it's our communities of practice and a magic that happens when we bring people together. Thank you. And I wanted to know if you had any questions or you wanted to share anything.
Thank you, Emily. Really, a lot of interesting insights on communities of practice and a lot of issues that are also we as a community and a company are facing right now. So from your last slide, I take the opportunity to go into some of the questions from the audience, and there's one on silos, and it's the community of practice risks becoming a silos itself. So what are your suggestions in order to avoid that to happen?
Yeah, I'm just going to stop my... So stop.
Oh, yes, please.
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay, so yes, and it's interesting, and I've had this question before from people. So I think it's really important. There's a couple of things. I think it's important to create a safe space for a community. Like you don't want to just open up the doors and say, everyone come in and everyone like listen to what we've got to say, because sometimes what you want to say is you want to be in a trusted group with each other. But you also don't want to create such a barrier for entry that no one else can come in. And there's a couple of ways that you might do that. One is you might have some sessions where you have closed sessions, and you might have some sessions where you have open sessions. So I used to do that. I had a community where sometimes we'd have like a closed door and it would be a conversation. And then other times we'd say, open it up and let anyone in, and that way. The other thing is that there might be times that you want to join up with other communities. So you might say, we've got a really common challenge here, or really common interest, or I've seen some communities, you might have an external speaker come in that is really relevant to lots of people. So there are times you might want to join up, or there's times you might want to collaborate with others. So it's a balance between keeping it a safe and trusted environment and opening it up to other people.
Yeah, sure. And this leads me to another question, because you talked about closed and open sessions, but it seems like being part of a community is rather time spending. So which rituals it makes sense to implement, and how much time to invest in the community?
Yeah. So there can be it can be lots of time. And there also, if there's lots of communities that you think, I want to be part of all of these communities, then when do you do your work? So there's definitely a balance. So I think if you're building a community of practice, particularly early on, I think it's really important to have a regular time to meet. So you have probably every week or every couple of weeks, you get, if you're in the same building, having a time to meet is really important. So it might be that your sole investment is that you go to that session, and that's it. You spend an hour every 2 weeks, and that's it. It might be that actually you then there might be some people that want to fix something, and you spin a working group out of that, and they spend a bit more time together on that, but it's something that they want to fix. If it's somebody that is more facilitative or is leading the community, they probably have a little bit more time that they spend on it. But if you can share out some of those leadership or kind of servant leadership type activities, like making sure you know what's coming up at the next session, or you have something booked in, or are you planning things, it can take a little bit more time, but sharing that out is important. I do think that if you have a really supportive organization, and as a community you want to do something like create some training, or you might say we really need a design system, like being able to carve out some proper time and build a team around producing something is more time, but I think that is a negotiation with an organization at that point.
And that's really interesting. And you mentioned being a servant leader, which is something that we do really care about. And my question for you would be, what are for you the top qualities for a servant leader in order to make sure that everyone gets involved in the conversations?
Yeah, I think what's really crucial in a community, so first of all, that the leaders of the community is a group of people. Like, I think that's really, really important. But those people are people that are there are people, when you meet them, they're naturally good at joining people up. They're naturally enthusiastic about community, and those are the people that you want leading the community, as well as some people that are good at facilitating is useful. So people are particularly people that are good at dealing with people, and if there's any conflict or those kind of things. But what's important is it's not about hierarchy. So it's not about the most senior person is the person that leads the community. Actually, that it's a mix of people, because we want to kind of break down some hierarchy in the community. And the important thing is that people are enthusiastic. So it's not, oh, now you've been, I don't know, now you've been promoted to a senior whatever, now you have to build the community. Because if you're forcing someone to do it and it's not in their, it's not their set of skills, then it's not going to work. So people that care about community, I guess people that are quite people.
Yeah, and this makes me think about one thing that you said earlier, that is that sometimes the impact of communities of practice is intangible, because maybe it makes people feel more confident or more ready to speak up. And how to track this intangible impact in order to make companies understand that it's a valuable thing to do and to invest on.
Yeah, and actually, again, today, my meetup today, there was lots of, I run a lean coffee style meetup. There was lots of questions about community today. and someone was asking about how they sell their communities into the organization. There's kind of two ways that I go about it. One, to see how well the community is doing, I tend to use those 5 benefits and say, are we getting these benefits? What often happens is that people share knowledge and they learn, and the support network comes first. Some of the other things come later on. But I always try and collect stories first, because the stories are impactful. So if you can, it's like the reason I use quotes in my slides, that these are real people, and you can connect to the fact that this is real people saying real things, and it's really important. So I think that's really important when you're thinking about community, and you can measure things like engagement if you want to, but you don't want to just be focused on numbers, because it's not just about quantity, it's also about quality. But then there's also there's other things to look at more widely as well. So what are how the story I had earlier, like about the iOS developers, for example, if someone has a problem and you hear that someone else has helped them with that problem by giving them the answer, or giving them some documents, or even giving them the code that fixes that problem, that is a huge you can almost turn that into a financial benefit for a company, to say, because we met, this happened, and if we didn't, this is how much it would have cost us. So it's almost like having the community stops this happen. Or if you can, it's quite hard to do, but if you can relate it to retention, for example, or hiring, so people aren't leaving because they feel like they have a support network. And I've also found when I've been hiring people, if I say to someone, when you join this organization, you're going to have this family, you have this community that's already here, and they're going to support you, and they're going to welcome you, and they're going to help you. It's a real incentive for people to join the organization, because it shows that it shows good things about the organization, but it shows they have a support network around them.
Thank you. And speaking of impacts, do you also have a story you'd like to share on how a community of practice had a meaningful impact on practices, on what you call better practices?
And I think probably many. And I'm going to go a little bit back, I guess, to the community that I spoke about at the beginning that I was part of. It was brilliant because I was able to hire people that knew loads of things that I didn't know, and I knew that I could learn from them. And we also, one of the things that I did there is I'd hired somebody that was could train, actually was a trainer as well, and could train people in learning how to use Kanban, like properly use Kanban. And so that's something that I managed to set up there, is actually we got some internal training on using a new way of working, which really helped. There were some teams that really needed to know that, and it really helped their delivery. So it had a kind of definite impact on their delivery.
That's nice. Thank you for sharing this. And I wanted to pick another question from the audience that is quite difficult, I believe, but not to scare you, but how to revamp the initial energy in a community of practice? Sometimes they start sleeping after a while they've been active, and there's sort of the engagement time at the beginning, and then they slowly go sleeping. How to revamp them?
Yeah, and I think, so the graph that I showed earlier, I think was really insightful. I'm going to see if I've got it in front of me here. When I first saw it, so I adapted this graph from somewhere else. I'm going to find it. I'm going to hold it up. See this graph here, which I adapted from somewhere else. So the thing that I found really useful is this bit here. So after a community goes from potential to forming, there's this dip, and this is a dip in energy and a dip in engagement, and this happens this happens with every community. And when I first saw that, was like a light bulb moment, because I was like, oh yes, so when a community first gets together, everyone's all excited and you meet new people and there's the potential of what could happen, and then there's this kind of dip in energy when everyone's like, it starts to become more normal and everyone goes, they've got work to do, and so that's really normal. So firstly, I'd say if you see that happening, don't worry too much, just carry on and you'll get past it, and that's really normal. Today, I was talking to somebody about their community that had been really active and people had changed, and some really key people had left, and they were just feeling sad because it wasn't as vibrant and as useful as it used to be. With them, we talked about coming back to need. So with a community, people will only take part in it, like it's voluntary, it's not mandatory. So it's not like your team. People will only take part in it if it gives them something. So understanding what people's needs are and what their motivations are is an important thing to do. So it might be that you actually want to get everyone together and have a bit of a reset and a retrospective. Actually, I really encourage communities to have retrospectives regularly anyway, to say what's working, what isn't. You might want to get together and say, you know, what is our purpose? Is it still our purpose? Like, is this still what we want to be doing? And actually, yeah, just get people in a room and work out what it is you want to be doing. Before that, you can go and talk to people and ask them, you know, why do they come? Why don't they come? Like, what is it that's missing for them? And then try and meet that need.
Seems also like an important feature for a service leader, actually. Yeah, and well, we're asking this to all of our guests since we are not off the pandemic yet. What did you learn from this period, and how communities are reshaping themselves since COVID?
I think on a personal level, working from home isn't totally new to me, but behaviors have definitely changed. And I see, so I've been running a meetup online for a few years, and I was doing it before the pandemic, and it's kind of continued. And I see people running from meeting to meeting. Like, people used to turn up to meetings, even online, like 5 minutes early, and now it's like they turn up on the dot, they leave on the dot because they go back to back, and there's no time for thinking in the middle. But there's also, we've lost our social time as well. So we've lost the time where you turn up to a meeting in a meeting room and you might have a chat to somebody for 5 minutes whilst you're waiting by the door for the room to open, or you have these wonderful kind of serendipitous connections that happen in the hallway and by the meeting room. And I think the pandemic's really highlighted the need to kind of increase social engagement in life, but also in the workplace. But the need was there before as well. It's just magnified now, that we definitely need to do that. So in my own online community, I've been finding ways to do things like random coffee, or I have a channel called Daily Outside Photo. And the point of Daily Outside Photo was to try and make myself go outside every day, which, you know, isn't always appealing when it's the same, walking around the same block, seeing the same thing every day, but trying to force myself to go out today, take a photo and share it on the Slack channel. And we have all these people now that share photos of their neighborhoods on the Slack channel, and they're in different parts of, mostly different parts of Europe, and it's the ones in Japan now. It's really lovely to see, and you get to know people a bit better, and it forces me to go outside.
That's nice. You gave us an interesting idea. Some months ago, we started a Slack channel. I don't know if it was a Slack channel or just a thread called My Office Today, where we just posted picture about our office for the day. It could be a balcony, it could be whatever, but maybe it's more effective showing what's outside. Actually, yes. So thank you for sharing this. And I believe we are almost running out of time, but I really wanted to ask you a last question, because in these 2 days, we tackled a lot the theme of introverts and how to make everyone's voice heard. So if you want to share something, some suggestions about this also for communities of practice, you're welcome.
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting one. I could also consider myself an introvert, but an introvert that forces myself to to do things. The thing I definitely I think this is in general, I really worry about the people that go quiet. Like it's like the kind of social thing. If you're in the workplace, you will see people, you will bump into people. If you're at home and you feel disconnected and you don't want to talk to anyone, and you're feeling down, and many of us have felt that during the pandemic anyway, it's very difficult. The people that remove themselves, you can't get in touch with them. So I think there's always, being particularly aware of who isn't turning up, I think is really important. But I think it's true in communities as well as it is in teams, is finding time to speak to people on a one-to-one basis. We do many things in our organizations that are groups, and we're around whiteboards, and we do retrospectives together and get around a Miro board, and everything is done in groups. It's also really important to find time with people on a one-to-one basis. Not everyone feels super confident at speaking up all the time, so sometimes their voice will never be heard. And yeah, if they just remove themselves, that's also really, really worrying. So reach out to people and find ways to talk to them.
Thank you for that. And it's really interesting because we had with you now, we had 5 guests in these 2 days, and I can see like some really strong patterns. And it's one of talking one-to-one and find time to talk to people is really one of the strongest ones. So really, thank you for sharing this. And you all tackle the communities of practice issue from these different angles or perspectives, but it really feels we are all moving towards the same approaches and lines. So it's really, really interesting and inspiring for the next year. So thank you, Emily, for staying with us and sharing your experience with us. Yeah, I hope that we will keep in touch also for the future, and good luck for your job. And I will continue to follow you on your blog because I loved it.
Thank you.
And now I believe we will call a break and then welcome our third and last guest for the Beat Camp, that is Domenico Polimeno. So thank you again, Emily. And
thank you for having me.
Ciao. Ciao, ciao.